Assalamualaikum. This lecture is part of ALA 2293 Landscape Planning Techniques, and for today I will be sharing the inventory elements for landscape resource planning. So for this lecture, there's actually two parts. The first part will be talking about biophysical environment, and then the second part in a different video will be talking about human community. Okay, so the primary source for this lecture was from The Living Landscape and Ecological Approach to Landscape Planning by Frederick Steiner. So I've extracted the process shared in the book as a basis for the inventory analysis process for landscape resource planning. So we'll go ahead and cover part one. But before that, let's talk about what is an inventory. If we look at the definition of inventory by Steiner, inventory is a systematic acquisition of information needed to describe and characterize a place. So the key words here are systematic, meaning that there must be some kind of organized methodology. Okay, and acquisition of information means how we get the information, and then how do we use those information to describe and characterize the site. So some of the common questions that we can begin with to describe what an inventory is such as, where is the place? What does it look like? What does it have? What is happening to it? Why is it happening? And how does it happen? So, for instance, if we were to describe our place in Gombak, what does Gombak look like? So Gombak is a combination of flat areas. There are ridges and valleys, and then we are surrounded by Bukit Tabur. So we are describing Gombak from its physical characteristics, but there are also other processes that a place have. So we'll go further on that later on. So everything is connected to everything else. Now, this is the basic premise of ecology, because we know that as an ecosystem, you have the abiotic and biotic elements living together, and everything is connected because essentially we live on one earth. We share the same sky, we share the same water body, so all the processes, the natural processes, are connected to one another. So ecology rests on the understanding of relationship about biophysical processes of an area. When we talk about landscape planning, it involves understanding what are the physical things that are there, and also the things that are non-physical, and also the processes that are happening at the place. We can think about the environment like the human body. For example, in our body, we have different organs, and each organ serves a different function to keep us healthy. A weakness or a failure of one organ may then affect our health. And we also know that blood carries oxygen, and things that we eat and drink will be absorbed by our body and eventually go out from our body. So imagine if one organ cannot function very well, it might then affect the functions of other organs, and eventually it might make us unhealthy. So if we think about landscape, or places like the human body, then we can begin to understand or imagine how everything in the environment are connected to each other. We can take the flood as an example of a common phenomenon that happens throughout the world. So why does flood happen? Is it just about water that is stagnant or collected in a certain area? Eventually, it becomes, the water level increase because of the intensity of the rain, or could there be other factors? Flood is a result of interaction of several natural phenomena. It starts with the movement of water, and usually from heavy rainfall that runs through the surface of the earth. But could there be other factors that causes flood to happen? Okay, some of the factors that may cause flood to happen, we can start with rainfall. But then, when the rain falls down on a land that has very steep terrain, or such as slopes and hills, then the rainfall might fall down the surface a lot faster compared to a flat area. Place has a lot of vegetation. The vegetation might be able to absorb some of the surface water runoff and slow it down. However, if a place does not have a lot of vegetation or land cover, it may cause the rainfall to keep flowing or eventually become stagnant in a place and then causes flood to happen. Now, factors of flood can also be affected by the soil conditions and also how well the drainage are, or the soil can drain the water. So it could be any one of these factors that relate or are affected by other factors. So this means that flood that happens is not simply just a relationship between water or rainfall and the land. It could be contributed by the conditions of the terrain, the soil, the vegetation and drainage, and other things. So in doing landscape resource planning, we need to collect and analyze a broad range of information about the biophysical process of an area, because it is different from designing a landscape at the backyard. We're talking about designing for maybe a district or a region, a big area. So the types of data needed are also broad range of information. When we collect this information, which we will cover after this, what are the inventory elements, we need to make sure that they are done in sequence, because when we do a sequence of collecting this information, it can help us to understand the process better. So this chronology of process provides a logical framework to organize information about the place. It can help us to understand how the place becomes what it is, and then what are the processes that occurs in the place. For instance, regional climate and geology help to determine the soils and water drainage system of an area. And this will then affect what types of vegetation and animals will inhabit a place. We can take the Malaysian rainforest as an example. Because our climate is tropical and we have a hot and humid climatic conditions too. So the tropical rainforest can live and thrive in these climatic conditions. And due to this, we can find certain animals and plants in our rainforest that may not be found in other places in the world. For example, we know that in the Arctic you can find the polar bear. However, we do have the sun bear, who is more adaptable and suitable to the tropical climate. We start. Before we collect all the information, what are the things that are necessary for us to prepare? The first start is on preparing the base map and original context map, because this will be the tool that will help us to graphically document our inventory data, which later on we will need to help us plan and design for the area. Information such as the location of settlements, where are the village area that might have been indicated on the map, or towns and cities. And then the locations of water bodies such as rivers, lakes, and the sea. And then definitely you will find contour lines because we will need to understand the profile of the land. And then elevations, roads, rail lines, political boundaries such as the state boundary or district boundaries, and then the forest areas. So these are some of the basic information that we need to have on the base map before doing further inventory and analysis. We can get the base map from several different agencies. For Malaysia, we can commonly get it from JUPEM, which is Jabatan Ukur dan Pemetaan Malaysia. We may also be able to request it from local authorities such as Majlis Daerah, Majlis Perbandaran, and also the City Hall. And then we may also obtain base maps from relevant agencies such as Landscape Department, Planning Department, Drainage and Irrigation Department, Wildlife Department, and Forestry Department. So when we get base maps from these different agencies, they might have information pertaining to their agencies as well. That could be a good reference for us to use in our inventory and analysis. This is an example of a base map from JUPEM. So you can see that the map can cover a large area. You can obtain hard copy and also soft copy, the digital version of the base map from JUPEM through purchase. And at the bottom of the map, you will see some legends and indications of the contents inside the map. Now, in the zoom in, you can see some of the details graphic to indicate where are the settlement area, boundary, water bodies, and also rivers and green area and so forth. Now we can go to the inventory elements of the biophysical element. So we will cover 9 of them, and then hopefully this 9 will help you to structure when you want to do your inventory analysis, where to start first, and then to understand how one element relate to another one. The first one is macroclimate. Macroclimate is also referred as regional climate, and we're talking about climate in the broader sense of an area. So the climate of an area is affected by the physical conditions such as mountains, ocean currents, the prevailing winds, and the latitude. A simple example to understand how climate changes is location of where we are, location of our country. Now, for instance, in Malaysia, we are located on the equator. So usually countries along the equator have similar type of climate, which is most probably hot. So macroclimate will affect the formation of physiographic region through weathering of terrain and the amounts of rainfall on the landscape. So for instance, areas that are very cold and have strong wind may have terrains that are rugged or sharper. If we look into photos or documentaries of areas near the Everest, when people go hiking, you can see that the rock formations are different than those rock formations that can be found in Malaysia. So this is affected by the macroclimate because of the weathering from the rain, and then because of the climatic factors of the area, then it affects the formation of the physical character of the site. From this map, we can see that Malaysia is located in the tropical region, and Malaysia can be described as having high humidity and heavy rainfall. So we can see countries that are located also along the equator that have the similar characteristic. So this map is from the Department of Meteorology in Malaysia, and you can see the distribution of temperatures in different states of Malaysia. So if you look into the map of Peninsular Malaysia, you can see the red area, which has higher temperature compared to the greens and the yellows. And that red area is actually Selangor and Kuala Lumpur. And in this map, it shows the mean of monthly rainfall distributed towards Malaysia. The yellow or orange one shows lower of monthly rainfall, while the blue and the pink ones shows the ones that would receive more rainfall throughout the year. Okay, the second one is geology. Now, geology relates to the study of rocks and rock formations. Geology is the study of the earth that presents the rock units and geological features such as types and age of rocks, faults, folds, and volcanic activities. Now, if you recall my previous video on reviewing the book Design with Nature Now, we need to understand that landscape planning involves the collaboration of various different experts. Now, in the study of geology, we can source the information and get advice from geologists. And the same thing goes with other inventory elements that we will discuss later on, is that these experts will know more details, and then when we do the planning for a certain area, it is very important for us to get these experts informed of how these different aspects of inventory would affect landscape planning. Geologic landscape planning is relevant first because we need to discover the mineral and energy sources that might be present in a certain area. And then through geology, we can also assess the potential hazards such as earthquake or volcano, because geological activities might affect the safety of the site or what is suitable to be inhabited or not. The third one is to evaluate the suitability of the area for construction, whether the geological conditions of the area are actually stable if we wanted to build something. And then the study of geology can also convey information about the history of the site. Now, if we look at a rock, it might just seem like a rock, but perhaps we're looking at an outcrop that has been there for millions of years. It might give us a different appreciation of the value of the place and how it could become something that attracts people to learn more about the place. Because we know that it has a high value, so it will determine how we can best plan the place. This is an example of a geologic map from Persatuan Geologi Malaysia and Universiti Malaya. So you can see that there are different distributions of geologic characters throughout Malaysia. Okay, the third one is physiography, or sometimes we refer as topography. So physiography is the physical geographic character of the place, and we often associate topography with contour lines and what the land looks like. So physiography are the physical conditions of the surface of the land. So this will include, identifying peaks and depressions, ridges and valleys, hills and flatlands, where are the slopes directed, and what are the steepness of the slope. If we take IIUM Gombak as an example, we know that it is located in a valley surrounded by the quartz ridge of Bukit Tabor. This map shows a sample of topographic map of Kuala PILAH and TAMPIN from JUPEM. So you can see the map on the right that focuses on Gemenceh has a lot of lines. So these lines are actually contour lines, and they have been drawn with 100-meter interval in height and meters. So when we use a contour map, we can generate the elevation of the site to understand the site profile. Okay, the map on the left shows the different elevations that are distributed towards the area. Okay, item number 4 is hydrology, which is a study of the water bodies. So in hydrological inventory, we would study the movement of water through landscape. The first one is groundwater, which is water beneath the ground surface. And the second one is surface water, water that flows above the ground. So this would be rivers, lakes, and the oceans. And groundwater would be like aquifers. And some aspects of water that we need to consider when we are doing an inventory and analysis is for groundwater to identify the depth to the water table. So water table is the upper level of an underground surface in which the soil or rocks are permanently saturated with water. So if you identify a place that has a high water table, this means that there's a lot of groundwater sources. and which also means that it might not be a suitable place for you to build something. And then the second aspect is looking into the quality of the water, the direction of movement, and the location of the sources. If we recall back early on, we talked about everything is connected to everything else. So water, even more because it is fluid, it is moving. So we need to look into the water sources and where it is traveling. And then the third one is hydrological process. For example, understanding the process of the water flows from the river basin to the river streams, and even, from rivers to the estuaries that eventually goes out to the sea. This plan shows the main rivers and lakes in Malaysia. So you can see that, Malaysia has a lot of rivers and then some numbers of lakes distributed all around the country. Okay, item number 5 for the inventory are soils. So soils are important because they are transition zone that links between the biotic and abiotic environment. Now, we have what goes on underground, and then also those things that live above the ground. In soil inventory analysis, we can look into the different types and classification of soils to determine the adaptability of various crops, grasses, and trees. Because how well a plant can grow will be determined by the fertility of the soil. And then soil survey can indicate soil profile, permeability, texture, erosion potentials, drainage potentials, and also of acidity and alkalinity of the soil conditions. So usually when we get a project that needs to examine the types of soil, experts such as the soil scientist would be a good integration into the team. In this example of major soil groups of Peninsular Malaysia, we can see that there are several different categories of soil such as brist, marine alluvium, peat, lateric, riverine alluvium, and sedentary. So if you recall back the map on the geologic formation of Malaysia, you can see that the patterns are quite similar in terms of its linearity from the north and the south. Because the conditions of the geology and then the physiographic character of the site would then determine what soils are present there. Item number 6 is microclimate. Refers to the climatic condition of smaller spaces. So microclimate is affected by the variations in slope, orientation of the ground surface, the soil type and moisture, the variations in the rocks, vegetation types and height, wind movement, and human-made features. So microclimate are the different climates found within a small space. We can take the comparison between a place at the beach and also a place next to the river. Because of the exposure to the ocean and the sun and also the sand, it makes the beach warmer or hotter as compared to a river that is surrounded by dense vegetation, have a flowing river and then filled with rocks. So, okay, this map shows urban heat island modeling of tropical city. This is Kuala Lumpur. Then we can look into the distribution of urban areas and woodland, which shows differentiation between the urban heat island. So we can see in the map, the red area indicates places that shows urban heat island, which are in the urban centers. Okay, the next item in the inventory list is vegetation. So as we know, plants provide source of oxygen. So this is integral for all living things. And then not only that, vegetation provide habitat for wildlife. it becomes a place where they live, where they find food. And then vegetation also has significant influence on fires and floods because it can determine how the natural process would operate or behave in that particular place. And we do know that certain plants have economic and medicinal values, and we use them for consumption. For example, we use hardwood to make construction and furniture, and at the same time, there are certain plants and herbs that are used for medicinal purposes. So plants can be classified according to the land cover of the area. This map shows a general type of forest in Malaysia. We can see that most of the land forest or hutan darat is located at the central areas of Malaysia. We will see later when we talk about the central forest spine of how this relates with wildlife. Okay, this image shows the uniqueness of our tropical rainforest, which shows a profile of mixed deep tropical forest. So we can see at the lowest level, is the forest floor covered by herbs, ferns and mosses. And then it goes up to understory species that may include small trees and shrubs species. And on the third layer are canopy species such as Hopia, Vetica, and Dipterocarpus species. While at the very top, which could reach up to 40 meters, are emergent species such as Dipterocarpus, Shorea, Compassia, and others. So when we look into the different profiles of the vegetation, we can also think about, there might be different species of wildlife and birds that inhabit at those different levels. These interesting maps from Global Forest Watch shows the tree cover in Malaysia. So let's take a look at the map on the left first. We can see that generally Malaysia is covered well with the trees, except for certain areas that might have less amount of trees such as Georgetown, Kuala Lumpur, and also Kota Baru, indicated by the white spots. While the map on the right shows a closer look at Kuala Lumpur and Selangor, and we can see that the tree cover is actually decreasing or very less at the moment. So a lot of the areas are white, which shows built spaces as opposed to areas covered by trees. Okay, this map, we can then rethink, we look into the fragmentation of the green spaces. The next one is wildlife. So wildlife is defined as animals that are not domesticated, so which means that they live and roam in the wild. Different from trees, as trees can be found in places and they don't move around, but wildlife roam around and they use different areas to reproduce, eat, and sleep. The map on the left shows the central forest spine, which is the connected forest area from the north of Malaysia to the south of Malaysia. So if we were to overlay this map with the topography map, we can see that the areas in the center is actually Banjaran Titiwangsa, and then that is why we can see hills and mountains in the central spine of Malaysia covered with vegetation because it is part of the central forest spine. It shows the various forest complex. When they are connected, they form a spine, and this includes Banjaran Titiwangsa, Banjaran Bintang, Banjaran Nakawan, Taman Negara, Banjaran Timur, Southeast Pahang, Chini and Bera Wetlands, Endau Rompin National Parks, and Kluang Wildlife Reserve. Now, the map on the right shows tiger habitat. So this map is trying to show the relationship between wildlife habitat and also vegetation. Now, the red areas shows where tigers are present, and we can see that the tigers are present within the central forest spine area. And the pink legend shows where tigers are expected to be present, and while the green shows potential tiger habitat. Now, because the central spine is connected, So wildlife such as tiger and maybe elephant and others are able to move from one place to another as part of their natural process. Imagine what would happen if we were to cut off the central forest spine by making it fragmented, by putting in or clearing the land in between it. The wildlife would probably roam within a small area and it would change the ecological process of the wildlife. And it may become a hazard where wildlife will start to encroach into places where humans live. The final one is understanding existing land uses. The 8 items before have described the biophysical characters of the environment which are naturally there. So number 9 is where humans start to intervene, which shows the land uses of the area. Land use is defined as the physical arrangement of space utilized by human. If we look into the image on the left, it shows where the houses are located and then an agricultural area which is situated behind some of the houses. So when we study land use, we wish to recognize how people are using the land, and then we want to distinguish land use from land users. This map shows the land use of Selangor in 2005. We can see that the land use has been categorized into 7 categories, which are the built-up area in red, situated in the center, the cleared land, which is in orange, which we don't see a lot on the map. And then you have commercial agriculture. So these are like rubber plantations or palm plantations, the one they are in big scale for commercial. You can see the green areas, dark green areas, which are the forest. And then mangrove area in light green, paddy and other agriculture in yellow. And then the water body, you can see some lines of dark blue and dots of dark blue, indicating rivers and lakes. And this map of KL shows a more detailed land use. For example, in the built-up area, it has been further subcategorized into residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, and also open spaces, recreation, and sports facilities. And then you can also see infrastructure such as road reserve, rail reserve, LRT line reserve, and terminal. So when we look into land use, then we can try to study what has the pattern of the land use been over the years and what is the ratio between built areas and natural areas. So this would then questions or ask us to decide what is the plan that is necessary to be done in order for the development to have a more sustainable approach. Use, we can know that it represents how the land has been utilized by human. Okay, so now let's recap the 9 inventory elements of the biophysical environment. We started out with macroclimate, also known as regional climate, and then that will shape the geology of the area, which will in return affect the physiographic character of the area, where the area will have different kinds and levels of topography. And then we looked into studying hydrology and water, soils, and then microclimate, and vegetation and wildlife, and finally existing land use. So that is all for part 1 on the biophysical environment. We'll continue in part 2 for human and community, and later on we'll look into how to analyze these inventory elements together. Thank you.